Dave, can I pick your brain about something?
Of course.
That what we just finished doing here. Is that worship? Is that all there is to worship? Is that what worship is?
That's such a good question. Did we worship this morning? We call it worship. It's a worship team. It's a worship service. Did we worship? Maybe. Maybe we did. I think some people did. You know, we sort of have this a little bit upside down. I think as the churches in North America, we've done this to ourselves, right? Where we've defined the music as worship. Worship actually has very little to do with what happens on the stage and everything to do with what happens in our heart. Like it has to do with what we give, not what we receive. And so we often make criticisms of the worship or the message or something and think, well, it should be better, or it didn't hit this, or I don't like that. And that's part of whether or not it's worship for us, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if I've ever told you, but the worst and best sermon I ever heard was the same sermon. I had let a young guy do some pulpit supply for me, and I was in the back row, and I'm just critiquing and just wondering, like, what have I done? Like, it was awful. Like, he couldn't string thoughts together. There was no theme. It was just like talking, and he was rambling, and yeah, sometimes I do that too. But, you know, I stopped, had a check in my spirit, and I said, you know, if I just stop critiquing him and just listen to his heart, what is he saying? Mm. And then his passion for young people to come to know Jesus came through. Amazing. And so my heart was challenged in the worst performed sermon I've ever heard. And so sometimes I think when it comes to performance, yeah, we should do our best when we lead, but our response to that is whether or not there's worship or not, right? Because worship usually is about sacrificial submission expressed. It's not about making a joyful noise alone.
Yeah. And for one, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that our worship is not dependent on me,
right,
and what I do.
Yeah.
You know, because we're human, and out of our humanness, if that's all our worship is dependent on, then we're never going to get there. We're never going to be satisfied in that.
It's scary to think that someone's worship is determined by how our performance is, right? And the irony is that if there is an audience, it's not out there, it's up there. Yeah. Right?
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah. So you brought up sacrificial submission expressed. Let's start with the sacrifice piece of like, what does that mean? Like, it should cost us something. Is what you're saying.
Worship always in the scriptures costs something. Like it's not something where you just frivolously do something and then reap the benefits of it and then move forward. It's always something that costs something. David, when he is purchasing the land that becomes the place where the temple is located, he is offered it freely. Aruna says, I'll give it to God. And David says, no, I will not offer to God something that doesn't cost me something. And so I wonder sometimes in our life, where is it the offering? Where is the sacrifice? Where is the cost for us? Yeah, it's great to sing some songs we like and to engage with people that we get along with or put up with at least, right? But are we willing to offer something? What do we offer? When we sing, even though sometimes the words are about expressing that submission, our hearts are often closed and cold.
Yeah. So. Well, actually, the first place in the Bible where worship is mentioned is actually Genesis 22. And this is where God tells Abraham to take his son and sacrifice him on the mountain. And he just tells his servants, stay here with the donkey. Abraham told the servants, the boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there. And then come right back.
The interesting thing about that passage, and you're right, the first time something's mentioned in the scriptures is very, very important. It helps you to understand what that concept is supposed to be about. And I don't know, I didn't read the whole passage, but I don't think there's any singing on that.
There's
mountain,
no worship
right?
team on the top of the mountain.
There's no worship team. There's no musical instrument. There's no song, right? But there's tons of worship, right? And the other thing that's interesting about that is that when they go, Abraham knows what's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
He's already been informed that the sacrifice was going to happen. And Isaac comes along with him, and he starts to recognize that there's missing pieces to worshiping God, right? Because there's a cost, there's a price that's going to be paid. That story changes a lot when you start to understand the ages, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time in Sunday school when we learn that story, you know, he's like 5 years old and he puts him on, and it's a great sacrifice as a parent and all that. But he's probably in his late teens, early 20s. And so all of a sudden the dynamic of a 120-year-old man trying to put a 20-year-old man on an altar changes the whole picture of what's happening there, right?
Yeah.
And so then we see Isaac sacrificing, worshiping, and they're both going to worship when they go up there. And he's miraculously, Abraham is understanding a promise that hasn't even been fully understood yet by saying that we will both come back. He knows he's supposed to kill his son, but then he knows they're both coming back because God has made another promise that Isaac would be the one through whom his seed would be reckoned. So putting the things that we don't understand, but we trust God, there's a sacrifice that happens in that, right?
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you think about if I come here this morning and I choose to worship, it'll cost me all week because it impacts us, right? It's the freedom to choose what I want to do, the freedom to follow the way of the world, really. When it comes down to it, that it should transfer over, right?
Well, it's hard because lots of times what happens is we come to a location and we tie events and emotion to a location instead of understanding that it's supposed to be the relationship or the commitment that goes with you, right? A great example of that is marriage. You're not just married when you're with your spouse. You're not just married when you're at certain locations. You're married all the time, and your behavior is supposed to reflect that, right? Yeah. And so it's not like, wow, this happened or that, or he didn't do this, or I didn't like what she said there, and that changes the dynamic. You're constantly, always. And that's, I think, why in Thessalonians it says that we're to pray without ceasing. It's not like constantly saying a prayer. It's living reverently in an attitude of prayer that relationship is always before you, right?
Yeah.
That it costs you throughout the week. It's not just an hour that you put aside on a Sunday, maybe, some Sundays, to show up and sing a song, and if you like it, then you worship. Like it's about coming to a place where you're willing to see what God wants from you and then where he wants to take you with that. Right?
Yeah. And it's actually, when we think of the posture of our hearts, we're not coming to receive in worship. We're actually just coming to give. That's again, that sacrifice, right? We're not coming to see what is being offered to us, but it's actually, no, I'm coming to choose to worship you.
Well, and you often hear people, it's like, well, I didn't get anything out of it, right? It's like, well, what did you put into it to get something out of it? Like, what are you offering of yourself to receive something in return, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know I saw a great clip yesterday. It was about these two guys who went to a gym, and they were both the same age, the same amount of unfit, and they've been there for 6 weeks doing the same exercise, the same weights, everything, and after that 6 months, the one was considerably in better shape than the other. And so as they were leaving, the one says, this gym's terrible, eh? Like, it must be the weights' fault or the gym's fault, or like, what's different about you doing the weights and me doing the weights? Because we don't have the same results even though we're doing the same things. And to the other guy said, well, when I leave here, I bring the gym with me. Like, when I go, I don't go and have a pizza and go drink a bunch of cola. I don't do that because I've been to the gym. I don't want to waste that. Whereas the other guy, he's justifying his eating of those things or not exercising outside of the gym. And so I think in the church, many times we do that. We come to church, we worship possibly, but then we go out and we live a life that's different than what we professed here on this day. And we shouldn't be surprised that our results are different when it comes to worshiping God if we do it that way.
Yeah. So practically, when we think of, actually if we take If we take Romans 12, I mean, we know what it says about worship in there. It says, and so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he's done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind that he finds acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. And we think about that. That's that transformation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not just here. It's not the location that matters, right?
Yeah.
Heard of Brother Lawrence,
Mm-hmm.
right? Practicing the presence of God. And he talks about the idea of everything and anything can be worship.
Mm-hmm.
And generally speaking, when it's something we don't want to do, that's a fertile ground for worship to happen. Because you're submitting yourselves to what God wants you to do, right?
Mm.
And he talks about doing the dishes as a worship to God.
Yeah.
And you're like, who wants to do the dishes? That we fight with our spouse about who's going to do it. And then we have kids so they can do it, right? But it's but the reality is that what you're willing to give is a true test of where your worship is.
Yeah.
Right?
And what does that look like practically? Like we're taking our everyday moments and offering them to him, really, as that piece of how can I worship you in obedience in this? How can I worship you in thanksgiving in this? How can I worship you just by acknowledging you in this moment? How can I worship you in my work? How can I worship you when I'm having coffee with this friend? Yeah, it's good.
Because it's the everyday, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where you are.
Yeah.
So there are times and places where we feel closer to God, right? But that doesn't make those places special other than our commitment in those moments, right? So you might have a place where you like to go and you connect with God in a different way. It might be different than my place, but that's not the important part of that. The important part of that is then moving back to where we live and spending time with people so that they know God as we know God, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Moses at the burning bush, he talks about the idea of holy ground, right? I've been to Israel, been to Egypt, been around the desert there. Haven't found that holy ground in a spot there with a tree that had, a bush that hasn't burned. It's like, what made that holy? It was that God was there, right?
Yeah.
Well, if we're believers in Jesus, the Holy Spirit, who is God, lives in us. Our life is supposed to be holy ground constantly. We don't have to go to a church. That doesn't mean don't go to church. But it means it's not the location that matters. And you can experience God anywhere, everywhere. But if you don't then take that and live in a holy way, in a way that costs you something, then you should question whether you're worshiping God or not.
Yeah, really. Like you think of the two disciples. It was John and I forget who it was. Anyway, the whole thing is people could tell that they had been with Jesus. Peter and John, they had been with Jesus.
Yep.
And isn't that really, when we have spent time worshiping, that should be the overflow of people should be able to tell that we've spent time with him.
Moses had to wear a veil when he had been in the presence of God. Peter and John, unschooled, ordinary men, but they had been with Jesus.
Yeah.
That gives us hope, right? That gives us opportunity. It isn't about how educated you are. It isn't about how spiritual you are. It's about how much time you spend with Jesus and then live like that, right? Living in such a way that it's a constant thing that moves forward. And always keep in mind where the price tag of it is, right? Now, the price tag of it is nothing we can earn. It's always what Christ has done. But then that then multiplies as we then submit that expression of sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
So Hebrews talks about God being a consuming fire, right? And that's not meant to scare us. It's meant to remind us how holy God is and how he expects us to live righteously. So it's not spiritual, it's not worshipful to sing great worship songs and then go out from here and treat people terribly, right? Like it's supposed to penetrate into your heart so that you live sacrificially so that other people don't have to pay the price of what you say you're worshiping God for.
Yeah.
Right?
So practically, Dave, practically, what does this look like for us?
I think it looks different for everyone, and I don't think that means that there's an excuse built in there for people. But I think definitely to those who have been given much, much is required. So if you know and you don't do, then it's sin to you, James says. But I think there's practical ways that you can offer yourself to God. So the cliche thing is, what would Jesus do, right? Mm-hmm. But that's just become something that we wear on a bracelet. It's not something that's branded on our heart. And so if we live that way, if we live in such a way that we say, you know, what would Jesus actually do in this situation? And then we do that, and you'll be able to understand whether that's true or whether that's just your interpretation for your own gain. But if you do that, it'll transform your relationships. First of all with God, also with your understanding of yourself, but then with others. Because generally speaking, relationships are built to be reciprocal. So if you're kind to someone, they're generally kind to you. If you're not kind to them, they generally are not kind to you, right? So when you are then expressing Christ to others, you give an opportunity for them to step into that in response. Because it's sometimes scary to be the first one to do something, right? But if we understand that God has been the first one through Christ to do it for us, and then we're mimicking him, then we live in that expression. We live in that power. It isn't just us trying to be super spiritual. It's us trying to become more like Jesus, right? And becoming more like Jesus is really difficult, but it's within our grasp as we submit to the Spirit and as we live in a worshipful way. That practically we don't just live selfishly. We're not like, I don't feel like doing that, or I don't want to do that, or they can do it. I don't feel like it, right? Yeah. And then as you do that, you build together. So in marriage relationship, you're a team together facing the world outside. You're not like fighting with each other all the time, or shouldn't be. Doesn't mean you want to have disagreements. Doesn't mean that everything's going to be rosy all the time, but it means that you should be on the same page moving together, not working toward against each other, right? As friends, as co-workers, as strangers, as enemies. The responsibility we have is to continue to respond to people as if Jesus was the one we were responding to. So if Jesus was leading the music, if Jesus was taking the message, if he was serving your meal, if he was washing your dishes, if he was, right, how would you treat him? And why do you treat other people differently than that? Right? Yeah. That's the message.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. And the reality is this is what we're created for, really.
Yeah. Like, it's not beyond your scope.
Yeah.
You're created to be able to do this. Not in your own strength, but as you submit to the Spirit, you're able to do this.
Yeah.
That's part of what he's called you to do.
Yeah.
And me. And anyone else who might be eavesdropping. Right?
And so here's a question in that, because there's these moments in our lives where things fall apart, or things feel very broken, or there's great loss, or there's great hurt. And we're talking about worship right here.
Yep.
That concept for some people would be incredibly hard to even look at.
I think it is.
So what is the solution in those moments where it's that hard to reach for, where we can't do it on our own?
I think we can't do it on our own is the first step. Mm-hmm. Second is to take smaller bites, right, of how you try to process that. If you've suffered a great loss, it's tough because sometimes you feel like I've done all the things I should and I prayed, and yet God hasn't answered this prayer, or God didn't stop this calamity from happening, or whatever. And are we willing to trust God in that? And your depth of your relationship is what determines whether that's the case or not. You look at the story of Job, and he experienced such great loss, and yet he refused to blame God, and he continued to worship God through that. And sometimes, the last chapter doesn't happen where you get the benefits all over again, right? Sometimes the loss is the end of the story for some of us here on this earth. And it's just having that time spent with Christ, with the Spirit, so that you're able then to respond by saying, the things that happen around me don't determine that relationship. If that happens, you can overcome those things. If it doesn't happen, it's really difficult. It's really difficult because in your own strength, you're trying to process this huge loss. And worship is not just going, oh, I'm sad or depressed, which is not the same thing, but I'm sad, therefore I'll sing a song, praise God, worship Him, and then this will be gone. That's not how the process works. But it is a part of how you are willing to take steps to purposely choose to go against how you feel so that you can receive the relationship and the worship that you want in that relationship with God.
And really, he wants to help us, right, in everything else. His heart's desire is that we worship Him, so He's going to help us do it if we ask Him.
Definitely.
So for me, there's certain situations, certain places, certain times where it's like worshiping is easy.
Yeah.
Go in the other direction. This right here, this is my paddle board.
Yeah.
All I have to do is take that and put it on any lake or any river somewhere, and it is just like, boom, God has put this thing in me that just, I connect with with Him.
Instantly transported.
And see His glory.
You're on the lake,
absolutely.
you see the glory.
Yeah.
He's in His presence. Yeah.
Yeah. That's for me. So what's your thing?
Oh, so many things. It used to be walking in the Alpine. It's hard to find Alpine here in Morris, but but I think for most people, I do think it's time spent alone. That you carve out time to be alone, which is a healthy discipline for you emotionally as well as spiritually. But it's time that you take to purposely allow the opportunity for God to step into your space. And we don't do that enough, and then we question why God's not around very often, right? So, I like to go fishing. Sometimes I go. We used to go hunting. There's different things that you can do where you're out in nature. You can do things alone, in your prayer closet and spend time with God, and that's good. But it seems like God has built into nature and into solitude this idea of His presence and meeting with people. Yeah. So that's a good thing to figure out for people, whether you're skiing or fishing or hiking or whatever it is, something where you're out, kayaking, walking, whatever it is, where it's just you, your thoughts, God, and you're out in nature to see Him, to see His presence, right?
Yeah,
so
it's good.
Yeah. So, I don't know if that answered your question, but maybe we'll see. Maybe we'll try some more opportunity for worship and see if anybody wants to enter into that.
Yeah. I think it's a plan.
Okay.
Let's choose to worship.
Agreed.